All right, everyone. Welcome to our first little video of the semester. And let me just go over a few basic tools I'm going to use today. Today we're going to start with pinch pots. It's really the most basic and simple of all methods or techniques for working with clay, because you really don't need much in the way of tools. You just need some clay, essentially. So I've got a bag of clay here, and so I'm going to make a pinch pot. So, a pinch pot is basically taking a piece of clay and forming it into a shape with your hands. It's very simple. You don't use a lot of tools for this, which is great. So this may seem like a pretty, using my wire here to cut the pieces of clay up. This may seem like a pretty kids types thing, but, working with clay, the essential part of that is touching it with your hands. And you can make a pinch pot with your eyes closed because you learn a lot from the clay by touching it. So this gets us away from tools and just what we can learn by picking up a piece of clay. Now here's a piece of clay. I cut it right out of the bag. This bag came from a factory. It wasn't dug up out of the ground or anything. It's what we more technically call a clay body. So I'm going to take my piece of clay and I'm just going to pound it on the table here a little bit. And that actually softens up the clay. You could also do what's called wedging, right? So wedging is where you do this with the clay. So you push the clay away from you and kind of mix it up, stir it up, and that actually makes the clay more plastic, and it knits the clay particles together so later on they don't split apart, you have cracks in your piece or explode. Now, if I were working with scraps of clay like this, then I would have to wedge it up a lot, okay? But I'm not. I'm working with a chunk right out of the bag, so it doesn't need much wedging. All right, so as I'm working with the clay, I'm finding out how soft it is, how wet it is, how dry it is. This is pretty optimum. It's just the right moisture content to make a pinch pot. Now my other clay here that I've cut out of the bag, it's uncovered. Right now it's starting to dry out. So while I'm working on this piece of clay, I'm going to cover this back up so it doesn't dry out, because what gives clay its plasticity is the amount of water in it. And the less water, the stiffer it becomes, and therefore the more difficult it is to shape it. At some point you want your clay to be drier, so you can do other things with it, like perhaps carve into it, but for this purpose you want your clay somewhat wet. So I'm taking a piece of clay, patting it into a ball. I did a minimum amount of wedging, and whoops, there we go. And now I'm left-handed, so I'm going to take the ball of clay and put it in my right hand. This is about the size of, an orange. And I'm going to take the thumb of my left hand and jam it into that piece of clay like this, till it feels like it's about a half or maybe a quarter inch from this hand, okay? And again, it's about feel. I can do this all with my eyes closed. So I'm going to take that piece of clay then and pinch it between the rest of my fingers and my thumb, like this. See, there's that little hole I stuck my thumb into, made with my thumb, and I'm going to pinch it between my thumb and the rest of my fingers, like this. As I do that, the hole in the middle is going to get bigger, and the walls are going to get thinner. Okay, so that's it. That's making a pinch pot. Now, of course, you don't want your pinch pot to be this heavy or this thick. That's about almost an inch thick. The rule of thumb is you don't want your pieces to be thicker than your thumb. Why is that? Because the thicker a piece is, the more likely it is to explode in the kiln. Because when a piece is fired, there's water that's chemically combined in the clay that gets driven off, and if your piece is really thick, then the likelihood of that exploding is a lot greater. It doesn't mean it will, but you can always fire a piece slow enough. Now, what's interesting about clay, it's a medium that's been with us probably longer than any other medium that I can think of. So that means a lot of the techniques that we're using in class today are techniques they probably used thousands of years ago. It's an age-old medium, and the techniques that you can use to work with it can be just as old. In other words, very simple, very direct. You don't need a lot of tools to work with clay, though we will introduce you to some tools during the semester. The other thing, too, is like if you decide you don't want to come into school because you still feel like it's not necessarily safe to do so, you can do all this stuff I'm going to show you can do at home, okay? So For example, if you want to fire your work, like you want to fire something and you don't want to bring it into school to have it fired in the kiln, you can actually put it in a Weber grill. You can take your Weber grill, get it nice and red hot, you put your piece in there under all the charcoal, you start the charcoals up, and you get it red hot. Now what you'd have to do is keep adding charcoal to that so it fires for 6 to 8 hours. But in that process, your piece of clay will fire and it'll become durable, okay? It'll also become black from all the carbon being burnt. But then you can always do other things with that. All right, so there I made a pinch pot. Now my pinch pot is got, you could say, there's my little pot. Notice I'm varying my technique. I was pinching it like this initially with my fingers and my thumb. Then I can put it like this and squeeze it and continue to shape it and make it bigger and bigger, squeezing it between the other hand and my fingers. Or I could even put it on my fist like this, all right, and pat it and make it bigger that way. So you can vary your technique, but always it's about touching the clay, feeling it, you know. Now as my piece of clay is working with it, my hands are warm, they're touching the clay, it's getting dried out, the clay will get a little bit stiffer. And if I want to keep my piece from getting too wet, I can sprinkle some water on. Well, what I like to do is take a little spray bottle and I'll spray it down occasionally like that and keep the clay nice and plastic to continue to do things with it. I might let it sit for a minute so that water I sprayed on soaks into the clay. The other thing I want to show you is, I have a little book here. This is all about making pinch pots, finding one's way with clay. I'm not sure if this thing is still available, but see, the pinch pot is a really important technique, and there's even a whole book devoted towards it. It shows you all kinds of interesting little techniques. All right. So there we go. There's my pinch pot. Now, if I want to give my pinch pot, see, it rolls around. It doesn't sit very flat on the table or on my wear board. Now, this is a wear board. It's a piece of board covered with some canvas. If you're going to work from home, you can work on a table. But anytime you work on a surface, if the surface is smooth like glass or formica or plastic, your clay is going to stick to it. So a wear board, which is a board with canvas on it, is more ideal. Or with some type of cloth. You need to put something that's not that's semi-porous so your clay doesn't stick to it. So there's my piece. Now there's other things I can do to it. If I want, I can pinch a little foot into it. Right now I see it rocks around, but what I want to do is I'm going to flip it over and pinch a little foot into it. That foot will do two things. It'll give it a base to sit on, but also it's an aesthetic element. It'll give my piece a little more height, so it has, you know, there you go. See, look at that. And it gives it more height, creates a visual break between the surface of my wear board and the piece itself. I can then repeat that pattern in the rim of my piece like this. All right, so there we go. And so I can repeat the pattern, and therefore the rim, which I'm now defining, again by just pinching into the clay, mimics the impressions created with my finger at the foot, and it becomes a framing device for the piece. Just like in architecture, the top floor and the bottom floor in more traditional architecture will do the same thing. There we go. There's my pinch pot. So what I want you to do is just practice making pinch pots. My next video is going to be making a towel out of pinch pots. So we'll cover more. We'll get into how to work once you've got some pinch pots. So just practice making them. Get used to making them. Make different shapes. Try different elements. If you don't like it, spray it down with some water, dribble some water on, wedge it back up, and use it again. Because clay, you can recycle over and over again until you get something you like, and then you can fire it, okay? Either in your Weber grill, or you can bring it to school, all right? So there you go. Our first technique, making pinch pots, all right? And our next one will be, next project is making a tower out of pinch pots.